She saved a stranger from gunfire. The next day, 100 black cars stopped outside her door. The neon sign of the Silver Bell Diner sputtered, casting a weak, buzzing pink glow onto the wet pavement of Marlow City. It was 20 minutes past 2 in the morning, and the rain, which had started as a drizzle at the beginning of her double shift, had turned into a cold, driving sheet that matched the ache in Emily Carter's bones. She locked the glass front door, the jingle of the bell sounding unnaturally loud in the empty diner, wiping her hands on her apron, a futile gesture. As the fabric was already stained with coffee and ketchup, she moved through the dark tables. Each cracked vinyl booth represented another tipped-over salt shaker, another wiped-down counter, another dollar bill crumpled in her pocket. It was never enough, but it was all there was. The kitchen was, if possible, even more depressing than the front. The metallic tang of the grill cleaner hung heavy in the air. Emily grabbed her thin, worn-out coat from the hook, unplugged the coffee pot, and pushed open the heavy steel back door. Bracing for the cold, the alley was her shortcut home, a 2-block gauntlet of overflowing dumpsters and fire escapes that dripped rust onto the concrete. The alley air, thick with wet cardboard and the sour breath of the kitchen's grease trap, was split by a sound that didn't belong. It wasn't a rat, and it wasn't drunk. It was a low, wet cough, followed by a sharp intake of breath that sounded like a sob. Emily froze. Every instinct screamed at her to go back inside, to lock the door and wait until morning. This was Marlow City, and the things that happened in alleys at night were not things waitresses survived. But the sound came again, a groan of pure, unadulterated pain. She edged forward, using the dim light from the kitchen door. He was slumped against the brick wall, half hidden by the massive, dented green dumpster. A shape, at first, just a darker shadow in the rain. Then she saw the glint of the water on the dark stain spreading across the pavement, and the unnatural angle of his body. He was bleeding. A lot. "Hey," she whispered, her voice too weak against the storm. "Mister, do you need an ambulance?" He didn't look up, just pressed a hand against his side. "No, go away." His voice was a rasp, low and full of gravel, but it held a terrifying command. Emily took a half step back, ready to bolt, but as he shifted, the weak light caught his face. He was younger than his voice suggested, but his features were hard, all sharp angles and dark stubble, his black hair plastered to his forehead by the rain and sweat. He looked, she thought, exhausted. That's when the world exploded. A car, tires screeching, rounded the corner at the end of the alley. It wasn't the sound of the engine that made her move, it was the sharp, popping crack of gunfire. It was completely unlike the movies. It was flat, ugly, and final. The man against the wall tried to move, to push himself up, but he only managed a pained grunt. Emily didn't think. There was no time for thought. Only a raw, primal instinct she didn't know she possessed. She launched herself forward, not away from the danger, but into it. She grabbed the front of his expensive-looking, blood-soaked shirt and used her full weight, all 120 pounds of exhausted waitress, to tackle him. They slammed into the narrow, foul-smelling gap between the dumpster and the brick wall. She landed half on top of him, her face pressed against the cold, wet fabric of his shoulder. The air was knocked from her lungs, the stench of garbage and gunpowder filling her senses. More cracks echoed down the alley. She heard the ping of a bullet ricocheting off the dumpster they were hiding behind, the sound vibrating through her teeth. She squeezed her eyes shut, shielding his body with her own, her heart hammering a rhythm so violent she thought it might break through her ribs. She was dimly aware of his grunt of pain as she landed on him, but mostly, she was aware of the solid, warm presence of his body beneath hers. Then, as quickly as it started, there was only the sound of tires squealing on wet pavement, fading into the distance. The silence that followed was heavier than the gunfire. There was only the rain, the drip, drip, drip from the fire escape, and the sound of 2 people breathing. One ragged and fast, hers, the other, shallow and tight, his. "They're gone," she whispered, though she didn't move. "Get off me!" Emily scrambled back. Sliding on the slick pavement, he watched her. his eyes impossibly dark in the gloom. He was assessing her, not as a savior, but as a threat. "You're hurt," she said, stating the obvious. He tried to push himself up the wall, using the bricks for leverage, but his arm buckled. He was strong. She could see that, a coiled, dangerous energy. But the blood loss was making him weak. The sirens started in the distance. "The cops," she said. A look of pure, cold fury crossed his face. "No, cops." He made another attempt to stand, and this time, he almost succeeded before a wave of dizziness sent him staggering. "You're going to bleed out," Emily said, her own voice shaking. "I work here, in the diner. Can you make it inside?" He stared at her. A long, calculating look. He was weighing options she couldn't possibly understand. Finally, with a sharp, reluctant nod, he grunted. She looped her arm under his, taking on his weight. He was far heavier than he looked, a dead weight of muscle and wet wool. He draped an arm over her shoulder, his hand gripping her coat. His touch was cold, but his breath was hot against her ear. "If you're setting me up," he hissed, his voice tight with pain, "I will end you before they end me. I'm making you coffee," she panted, dragging him toward the light. "If you don't bleed on the floor first." She hauled him through the kitchen door and kicked it shut. The thud echoed. She fumbled for the deadbolt and slammed it home, her hands trembling so badly she could barely grip the metal. He slumped against the stainless steel prep table, leaving a smear of blood. The harsh fluorescent lights of the kitchen were unforgiving. He looked worse in here. His suit, which she now saw was incredibly expensive, was ruined. The wound was on his left side, just under the ribs. "Sit," she commanded, grabbing a stack of clean towels. He didn't sit, but he leaned heavily, his knuckles white as he gripped the edge of the table. "I need to look at it," she said. "Don't touch me." "I just saved your life, you idiot," she snapped, the adrenaline making her reckless. "You can either let me stop the bleeding or you can explain to the cops why you're leaking all over my floor. Your choice." That hard stare returned, but the fight was draining out of him. He gave another sharp, curt nod. She grabbed the diner's industrial-sized first aid kit from the wall. It was mostly filled with butterfly bandages and cheap antiseptic for kitchen cuts, but it would have to do. "Lift your arm. I have to get the jacket off." He gritted his teeth and did as he was told, sucking in a sharp breath as the wet fabric pulled at the wound. She had to help him peel the suit jacket and the shirt away from his skin. Underneath, he wore a leather shoulder holster. It was empty. Emily's breath hitched. She forced herself to ignore it, focusing on the wound. It was ugly, a ragged tear, but the bullet seemed to have passed through. "You're lucky," she muttered, pouring antiseptic onto a clean towel. "This is going to hurt. Just do it." She pressed the towel to the wound. He didn't flinch, didn't make a sound, but his entire body became rigid, his eyes closing for a fraction of a second. She worked quickly, her hands suddenly steady. She cleaned the entry and exit wounds as best she could, then applied thick gauze pads, taping them down with medical tape. It was a clumsy, amateur job, but the bleeding slowed. She stepped back, her hands covered in his blood. The sirens were closer now, slowing down. "They're outside," she said, her voice dropping. He was already moving, pulling his jacket back on with a wince, hiding the holster and the blood. He looked almost normal. If you ignored the deathly pale cast of his skin, "They'll come to the back," she said, panicking. "They always check the alleys." He scanned the kitchen, his eyes landing on the walk-in freezer, then the pantry, then her. "The front. It's locked," she said. "Unlock it." He was already moving, walking straighter now, the pain hidden behind a mask of pure, cold control. She hurried after him, fumbling with the keys at the front door. "What do I tell them?" she asked, her hand on the lock. He reached past her, his hand covering hers. His fingers were icy cold, but the grip was like steel. He didn't look at her. He looked through the glass, into the flashing blue and red lights that were now stopping just up the street. "You saw nothing. You heard nothing. You are a waitress, cleaning an empty diner. And you?" He turned his head, his dark eyes meeting hers. The intimidation was back, a physical force that made her want to step away. I was never here. He pulled a wallet from his jacket, but she put her hand up. No, just go. He paused. A strange expression flickered across his face. Annoyance, confusion, maybe something else. He pulled his hand back. He opened the door just a crack, peered out, and then slipped into the rainy darkness, moving toward the opposite end of the street from the police cars. He stopped just outside the circle of neon light, turned back, and looked at her. "You're a fool," he said, his voice quiet but carrying over the rain. "You saved the wrong man, sweetheart." He was gone. Emily locked the door, leaned her forehead against the cool glass, and let out the breath she felt like she'd been holding since she stepped into the alley. The next morning, Emily woke to the sound of banging. It wasn't the rattling pipes of her apartment building, and it wasn't her neighbor, Mr. Henderson, arguing with the television. It was a deep, resonant, authoritative banging on her front door. She sat up, her heart instantly pounding. The events of the night before came rushing back, the gunfire, the blood, his eyes. She was still in the sweatpants and t-shirt she'd collapsed in, her work clothes in a damp pile by the door. The banging came again. Bam, bam, bam. "Who is it?" she called out, her voice thick with sleep and fear. No answer, only a heavy, oppressive silence. She crept out of her small bedroom, wincing as the floorboards creaked. She moved to the front window, the one that overlooked the street, and pulled the edge of the cheap vinyl blind back just an inch. Her breath caught in her throat. The street was gone. It had been replaced. It wasn't a parade. It was an occupation. A silent, black steel serpent that coiled around her block and disappeared around the corner. She counted 3, 10, 50, before she stopped. It had to be 100. 100 gleaming black sedans, parked bumper to bumper, engines silent, windows tinted so dark they looked like holes in the world. Neighbors were peering out of their windows, their faces pale. Mrs. Petrov from 3B was holding her cat, her mouth open. The banging on her door sounded again, and this time she jumped so hard she hit her head on the window frame. "Miss Carter, please open the door." The voice was calm, male, and projected. It was not a request. Her hands shook as she fumbled with the 3 locks on her door, the deadbolt, the chain, the knob. She pulled it open a few inches. 2 men stood there. They were identical in their severity. Black suits, white shirts, black ties. They were tall, broad, and had the same impassive, polished stone expression. "Emily Carter?" the first one asked. She just nodded. "Please come with us. Mr. Romano would like to see you." "I don't know any Mr. Romano. I have to get ready for work." It was a weak, stupid lie. The man didn't smile. "Your work has been handled. Miss Carter, please, do not make us assist you." The threat was quiet, but it filled the tiny, drab hallway. She looked past them, down the stairs, where 2 more men stood. They were everywhere. She was trapped. "I need my purse," she whispered. "That won't be necessary." She stepped out of her apartment, not bothering to grab her keys, and they flanked her, one in front, one behind. The walk down the stairs was the longest of her life. They didn't touch her, but their presence was a cage. They exited onto the street. The air was cold, but the silence of the neighborhood was colder. Everyone was watching. No one was moving. One of the men opened the back door of the limousine parked directly in front of her building, a car so long and black it seemed to drink the morning light. He gestured inside. Emily bent down and slid onto the soft, cream-colored leather. The door shut behind her with a heavy, final thunk, sealing out the world. The interior smelled of leather, rich cologne, and something else. Power. He was sitting opposite her. It was the man from the alley, but it wasn't. The man from the alley had been bleeding, desperate, and coated in grime. This man was pristine. He wore a dark blue suit that was perfectly tailored, a crisp white shirt, and no tie. His dark hair was combed back, still damp, perhaps from a shower. There was no sign of the wound, no trace of the violence, except for a faint, fading bruise high on his cheekbone. He was calm, he was powerful, and he was watching her. Emily Carter, he said. His voice was the same, that low, gravelly rasp, but now it was smooth, controlled. 27 years old, waitress at the Silver Bell Diner, double shifts, 6 days a week, apartment 4A, no family in the city. You are very predictable. Who are you? She asked. Her voice small, but she was proud it didn't shake. My name is Luca Romano. He said the name as if it should mean something to her. When she just stared, a flicker of amusement crossed his face. You are now under my protection. Miss Carter. The words hit her like a slap. Protection? I don't want your protection. I don't want anything from you. I need to go to work. As I said, he continued, as if she hadn't spoken, your job is taken care of. You won't be going back. You can't do that, she said, her voice rising in panic. You can't just take me. I can, he said simply. There was no malice in it, just fact. And I am. The men who shot at me last night, they were not aiming for me. They were aiming for the Romano family. They saw you. They saw you help me. In their world, that makes you my associate, my friend. He said the word like it tasted strange. They will not stop to ask questions. They will simply cut the loose end. And you, Emily, are the loose end. She stared at him, the cold logic of his words sinking in. You saved the wrong man, she whispered, echoing his words from last night. A small, humorless smile touched his lips. You are beginning to understand. The car was moving, gliding silently through the streets of Marlow City. Leaving her rundown neighborhood behind, they drove for 20 minutes, heading downtown, then uptown, toward the gleaming glass towers that pierced the skyline. They pulled into a private, subterranean garage. Her door was opened by another suit. Luca got out and simply started walking, not looking back, assuming she would follow. She did. They took a private elevator, which opened up directly into a penthouse. Emily had seen wealth on television, but she had never stood in it. The room was massive, 2 stories tall, with a wall of glass that looked out over the entire city. The furniture was minimal, modern, and looked impossibly uncomfortable. Everything was black, white, or chrome. It was beautiful, sterile, and colder than the alley. A man, older, with a thin mustache and a wary face, greeted them. Mr. Romano, the accommodations are ready. Good, Antonio. Have security posted on this floor. No one in or out without my clearance. And the girl? Antonio asked, his eyes flicking to Emily with mild disdain. Is to be watched, Luca said, but not touched. She is under my care. Antonio nodded and disappeared. Emily was left standing in the middle of the marble floor, her worn-out sneakers a smudge on the perfect white. She felt like a stray dog brought into a museum. She was on top of the world, and she had never felt so small. Luca walked to the window, clasping his hands behind his back. The morning light turned his silhouette into a black void against the bright sky. You will be safe here, he said, his back to her. You will have everything you need, food, clothes, anything you ask for, but you will not leave. A gilded cage. Why? She finally asked, her voice hoarse. Why did you do it? Last night? She expected him to ask for clarification, but he didn't. He knew what she meant. He turned slowly, his gaze heavy. He walked toward her, stopping only a few feet away. He was taller than he had seemed in the alley, and he loomed over her. Why did you help me? He countered, his voice low. You knew I was trouble. You saw the gun holster. You're not stupid. You should have run. You should have let me bleed. His eyes searched hers, not with gratitude, not with anger, but with a deep, unsettling curiosity. He was a man who understood angles, leverage, and payment. He couldn't find her angle. Emily held his gaze. The fear was still there, a cold knot in her stomach, but so was the memory of the rain, the desperation, and the sudden, overwhelming pity she had felt. She gave him the only honest answer she had. I don't know, she whispered. You look like no one had helped you in a long time. The words hung in the sterile air. She saw something shift in his eyes, something deep behind the cold control. He didn't move, but she felt his focus narrow, like a lens clicking into place. The air between them crackled with a tension that had nothing to do with the men outside the door or the city far below. He wasn't looking at her with suspicion anymore. It was something else, something darker, deeper, and infinitely more dangerous. It was the look of a man who had just found something he didn't know he was looking for and had no intention of letting it go. The penthouse was a cage made of glass and cold air. For 3 days, Emily floated through its sterile, silent rooms, a ghost in borrowed clothes. Her old life, the smell of burnt coffee and the ache in her feet, felt like it belonged to someone else, a lifetime ago. Her world had shrunk to these 4,000 square feet, the floor-to-ceiling windows displaying a city she could no longer touch. New clothes appeared in the massive walk-in closet, cashmere sweaters, silk pajamas, and jeans that cost more than her monthly rent. They felt like costumes, heavy and wrong on her skin. Her phone was gone. In its place, a slim, black device sat on the marble kitchen island. It had 2 contacts, Antonio and Luca. She had not touched it. She was never alone. There were always 2 men, dark suits, silent mouths, stationed by the private elevator. They were polite, calling her Miss Carter, but their eyes were hard and watchful. Her apartment, Antonio had informed her, was being monitored. Her job at the Silver Bell was indefinitely on hold. She was a prisoner, served gourmet meals she barely tasted. On the 4th night, she decided she would rather face the men who tried to kill Luca than spend 1 more minute suffocating in this expensive, quiet tomb. She had watched the guards. They changed shifts at 3 in the morning. There was a service staircase near the kitchen pantry, meant for catering staff. She waited until the hallways were still, her heart a cold, heavy drum against her ribs. She slipped out, her bare feet silent on the cold marble, and eased open the heavy steel door to the stairwell. The sudden scent of concrete and dust was intoxicating. She ran, taking the stairs 2 at a time, adrenaline souring her mouth. She made it down 4 flights, her lungs burning, hope rising in her chest, before she rounded a landing and stopped dead. 2 more men stood at the bottom of the next flight, looking up, their faces impassive. They had been waiting for her. "Miss Carter," one said, not unkindly, "this stairwell is not for you." The humiliation was worse than the fear. She didn't fight as they silently, respectfully, escorted her back up, one in front, one behind. They didn't grab her, but she felt their presence like a physical barrier. When the elevator doors opened back onto the penthouse, she expected the empty living room, the city lights, the silence. She did not expect Luca. He was standing in the center of the dark room, a silhouette against the window, the city's glow outlining the terrifying stillness of his shoulders. He hadn't been there when she left. The guards melted away, the elevator doors sliding shut with a soft, final whoosh. "That was predictable," he said. His voice was not loud. It was worse. It was a low, pressurized calm that vibrated with contained fury. "You can't keep me here," she whispered, her hands balling into fists. "I'm keeping you alive." He stepped out of the shadow, and she saw his eyes. They were cold. "Did you think they were joking? Did you think this was a game?" "This isn't my life," she shot back, her voice rising. "My life is my apartment, my job, the paycheck I was supposed to get on Friday. You stole that. You can't just lock me up because I helped you." "Yes, I can." He moved closer. "And I did. Because the alternative is that I identify your body in the city morgue. Those men don't leave witnesses. They don't forgive." He stopped, just a few feet away, close enough that she had to tilt her head back to meet his gaze. "You need to understand what you stepped into," he said, his voice dropping. He turned and walked to the bar, a wall of dark wood and gleaming bottles. He poured 2 glasses of amber liquid, the sound of the heavy decanter the only noise in the room. He held one out to her. She shook her head. He placed it on the coffee table in front of her. "Drink it, you're shaking." He took his own and swallowed half of it in one motion. He stared into the glass, not at her. "You still don't know who I am, do you? You saved a man in an alley. You didn't ask his name. You said your name was Luca Romano?" "I am Luca Romano." He said it simply, but the weight of the name settled in the air. I am the boss of the Romano crime family. Our name has been synonymous with this city's underworld for 70 years. The men who shot at me were from the Russo family. They are trying to take my territory. They failed. Emily sank onto the edge of the stark white sofa, her legs giving out. It wasn't just a rich man. It wasn't just danger. It was this, the Mafia. The kind of stories you read about, the kind of men who ended up in the papers face down on the sidewalk. You saved me, he continued, turning to face her. And you were seen. To them. You are not a waitress. You are my confidant, my woman, my property. And to them, the easiest way to hurt me, to prove I am weak, is to destroy my property. His words were brutal, but his eyes were fixed on her, willing her to understand the stakes. So yes, Emily, you are in this war. You have been since you pulled me behind that dumpster. You just didn't know it until now. He finished his drink and set the glass down with a heavy click. He was still wearing the suit from that day, but his tie was gone and his collar was open. He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture of profound exhaustion. He winced, a sharp, sudden movement, and his hand went to his side, under his jacket, the waitress in her, the caretaker. Spoke before she could stop it. You're still hurt. It's fine, he bit out. It's not. You're favoring it. He gave her a look of dark annoyance, then turned away, shrugging off his suit jacket and tossing it onto a chair. He unbuttoned his cuffs and rolled up his sleeves. He turned his back to her, walking toward the window, and in the reflection of the glass, she saw him unbutton his white shirt, pulling it free from his pants to check the bandage on his ribs. She saw the scars. They littered his back and sides, pale, silvery lines against his olive skin. A long, puckered scar ran diagonally from his left shoulder blade down his ribs. The clear mark of a knife, lower near his hip, were two small, round indents, long-heeled bullet wounds. They were a roadmap of a life she couldn't imagine, a testament to the violence he spoke of. He wasn't just a boss. He was a soldier. Who? She whispered, horrified. Who did that to you? He tensed, his back still to her. He slowly tucked his shirt back in. It doesn't matter, he said, his voice flat, all emotion wiped clean. They're just reminders. Reminders of what? He turned around. His eyes were empty, guarded. That you trust no one. That everything can be taken. That family. He stopped, his jaw tightening. He never spoke of family. They are reminders to never be weak enough to need help. And then I came along, she said, understanding. And then you, he agreed, his voice quiet, came along. The tension lasted for another 5 days. He kept his distance. He was gone most of the day, returning late, and she would hear his footsteps in the hall before he disappeared into his own wing of the penthouse. Then, on the 10th day, Antonio informed her they were moving. A more secure location has been prepared, was all he said. Emily didn't argue. She just packed the few things she had. This time, 4 men, including the stone-faced Marco, escorted her. They rode the private elevator down to the subterranean garage. It was cavernous, echoing and cold. 2 black sedans were waiting, engines idling. Marco opened the rear door of the first car. Miss Carter, Emily paused. She was carrying a small overnight bag, a new one, leather that had appeared that morning. As she bent to get in, the bag slipped from her shoulder, spilling a hairbrush and the new black phone onto the concrete. I'm sorry, she murmured, kneeling to retrieve them. Wait, Luca's voice echoed from the elevator bay. He was walking toward them, his face a mask of concentration. He wasn't supposed to be there. He didn't look at her. He looked at the car, at Marco, at the driver. Something's wrong, he said, his voice low. Sir? Marco asked. The car is clean. We swept it. Luca kept walking, his eyes scanning the empty garage. Change cars. Put her in the second one. Mr. Romano, we're on a schedule, Marco insisted, annoyed. Now. The word was a gunshot in the quiet garage. Marco visibly bristled but nodded, moving to open the door of the other sedan. Emily, still crouching, picked up her phone and stood. She was halfway between the 2 cars, confused. When the world turned white, the explosion was not a sound. It was a force. It was a deafening, visceral whump that stole the air from her lungs and slammed her backward. A wave of suffocating heat hit her, and the car she had been about to step into dissolved into a fireball of metal and glass. She was flying, then skidding across the concrete. Shrapnel, hot and sharp, pinged off the pillars around her. The world was screaming alarms and ringing ears. Before she even landed, he was there. Luca had crossed the distance in a second, tackling her, shielding her body with his own as they hit the ground behind the second car. Concrete dust and smoke rained down on them. It was the alley again, but everything was reversed. He was on top, his weight pressing her into the ground, his arms rigid, shielding her head. He pulled her up, his hands rough, gripping her arms. "Are you hit? Emily, look at me! Are you hit?" She was shaking, her ears ringing so loud she could barely hear him. "No, I didn't drop my bag." "To hell with the bag," he roared, pulling her against him and dragging her back toward the elevator shaft, his men already surrounding them, guns drawn. He saved her. He hadn't been on the schedule. He had come down. He had been watching. They didn't make it to a new location. They went back up to the penthouse, the glass cage, this time. It was filled with the noise of grim-faced men, of Luca snapping orders, of Antonio looking pale. Luca dragged her not to her room, but to his study, a dark room lined with books and a single, massive desk. He slammed the door, shutting out the chaos. She stood in the middle of the room, covered in soot and concrete dust. The shaking started. Not just her hands, but her knees, her teeth. The delayed shock hit her like a physical blow. "They tried to kill me. They tried to kill me," he corrected, his voice a raw, furious rasp. "You were just the bait." But he looked at her pale face, her eyes wide with a terror that went beyond screaming. He saw her, truly saw her, small and trembling, a civilian broken by his war. "No," he said, his own voice breaking, all the fury draining away, leaving something raw beneath. "They knew you were with me. They knew, and they aimed for you." She slid down the heavy oak door, her legs finally failing, and buried her face in her hands. The sobs were silent, racking, tearing her apart. She had almost died, for nothing, for helping a stranger. She heard him move. He knelt in front of her. She expected him to tell her to be quiet, to be strong. He didn't. He put his hands on her shoulders. He didn't shake her. He just held her. Then, gently, he pulled her forward until his forehead was pressed against hers. She stopped crying, her breath catching. He was breathing hard, his eyes closed. She could feel the heat radiating from him, the smell of smoke and his cologne filling her senses. "I will not let them touch you," he whispered, the vow torn from his throat. "Do you understand me? I will find them, and I will end them. You matter now." She looked up, her tear-filled eyes meeting him. His face was inches away, smeared with soot, his jaw tight. His eyes were not cold, they were burning, a black fire of possession and a terrifying, protective rage. The air between them changed. It was no longer comfortable. It was a different kind of explosion, quiet and slow. He didn't move. She didn't breathe. His lips brushed hers, barely a touch. It was a question, hesitant and rough. She didn't pull away. She didn't know how to move. He took the stillness as his answer. He kissed her. It wasn't soft. It wasn't gentle. It was slow, and it was full of a buried hunger that stunned her. It was the kiss of a starved man, a man who had forgotten what it felt like to touch something that wasn't hard or cold. His mouth was firm, demanding, yet impossibly careful. His hand moved from her shoulder, sliding up her neck, his thumb brushing the soot from her cheek. His grip was possessive, his fingers tangling in her hair. She should have been terrified. She was. But her hands, of their own accord, came up and gripped the front of his shirt, holding on, anchoring herself in the storm. The kiss deepened, a collision of fear and relief, of his control and her surrender. It was heat and desperation and the metallic taste of the explosion. It built, hotter and heavier, until he was bracing himself against the door, his body pressing her into the wood, his mouth tracing a line from her lips to her jaw. Then, with a shuddering breath, He tore himself away. He pulled back, only inches, resting his forehead against hers again. His breathing was ragged. His eyes were closed, his entire body trembling with a violent restraint. "Not," he whispered, his voice rougher than she'd ever heard it. "Not unless you're sure." He stood abruptly, leaving her breathless and confused, slumped against the door. He turned his back to her, running a hand over his face. She was torn between the man who had just kissed her with a desperate, hidden gentleness and the man whose world had just tried to vaporize her. She didn't know if she was safer with him or if he was the most dangerous thing of all. That night, she woke up, her heart pounding from a nightmare of fire. The penthouse was silent. The digital clock said 4:13 in the morning. The door to her bedroom was open with just a crack. She crept out of bed and pushed it open. He was there, in the hallway. He had dragged a heavy armchair from the living room and placed it directly opposite her door. Luca Romano was asleep, slumped in the chair, his head tilted back against the cushion. He was still in the clothes from the garage, stained with soot and grime, and he was still wearing his shoulder holster. The dark metal of the gun rested against his ribs, rising and falling with his slow, steady breaths. He was guarding her. He was her jailer, and he was her sentinel. The tension between them, restrained and palpable, settled in the dark hallway like a living thing. The morning after he slept in the chair, the penthouse was different. The silence was still there, but it was no longer empty. It was charged, heavy with unspoken things. Luca did not keep his distance, but he did not touch her again. Instead, he began to talk. He didn't explain, he stated. He would sit opposite her at the massive, empty dining table while she pushed a piece of fruit around a porcelain plate, and he would drink his black coffee and detail the landscape of her new life. "There are 4 families in Marlow City, no way," he said on the first morning, his voice as flat as if he were reading a stock report. "There is us, Romano. There is the Russo family. They are animals, all brute force. No strategy. They were the ones who sent the car. They are the ones who shot at me in your alley." Emily listened, her hands wrapped around a warm, untouched mug. "There are the Falcones," he continued. "They are old money, snakes in boardrooms. They prefer poison and politics to bullets, but they will use bullets if they must. And there are the Irish, the O'Malleys. They keep to their territory, but they are watching us all bleed, waiting for a chance to expand." He was teaching her. He was arming her, not with a gun, but with knowledge. He explained the code. Loyalty was everything, but true loyalty was rare. Family was not just blood, it was the men who stood with you. Betrayal was the only sin that could not be forgiven. He was the boss, capo. His word was law, and by saving him, by being seen with him, she was now under the blanket of that law, whether she liked it or not. A week after the explosion, he brought his inner circle to the penthouse. Emily tried to stay in her room, but Luca commanded her presence. "You are here," he'd said. "They need to see you are not a secret. Secrets are liabilities." She stood by the window, feeling like a misplaced piece of furniture. There were 3 men. Antonio, the older, wary man she had met, was his consigliere, his advisor. He nodded to her, his eyes still holding a deep suspicion, but now tinged with a grudging respect. The explosion had proved her importance. The second man was Marco, the one from the garage. He looked shaken, his face pale. He had failed, and he knew it. He wouldn't meet her eyes. The third man was new. He was younger than Luca, perhaps in his late 20s, with sharp features and restless, intelligent eyes. He wore a suit that was more fashionable than Luca's, his dark hair perfectly styled. "This is Nico," Luca said, his hand gesturing to the man. "My top lieutenant. He handles the street operations." Nico looked at Emily. He didn't nod, he didn't smile. His eyes raked over her, from her bare feet on the marble floor to the simple gray sweater she wore. It was a look of complete, cold assessment. He saw her, and he dismissed her. "Is this what the Russos are dying over?" Nico asked, his voice smooth, but with an undercurrent of insolence. He was speaking to Luca, but his eyes were still on Emily. A waitress. This, Luca said, his voice dropping an octave, becoming the steel she remembered from the alley, is Emily. She's under my protection. Which means she is to be treated as you would treat me. Nico's jaw tightened. Of course. Boss. But as he turned away, his gaze flickered back to her. The message was clear. You are a weakness. You are a mistake. The tension in the penthouse grew. Luca was hunting. He was a lion pacing the confines of his cage, snarling down the phone, holding hushed, furious meetings with Antonio. The car bomb had been an inside job. Someone had given them the schedule. Someone had known which car she would be in. The paranoia was a poison in the air. Every guard was suspect. Every silence was a conspiracy. Then, 2 weeks after the explosion, Luca walked into her room. She was reading one of the many books that lined his study. Books she had borrowed to fill the crushing weight of the hours. Get dressed, he said. What? Why? We're going out. He tossed a heavy, black garment bag onto the bed. Put this on. Antonio will send a woman to help you with your hair. We leave in 2 hours. Going out where? Luca, I don't... It's a charity gala, he said, cutting her off, his voice impatient. The mayor's annual children's hospital benefit. Every family will be there. It is a mandatory truce. No business, no violence. He paused, his eyes meeting hers. And you will be with me. I need them to see you. You need them. You mean you're using me. To show me off. Like property. The word hung in the air, heavy and ugly. He stepped closer, his face hardening. I am showing them that you are not a secret. I am showing them that you are not a weakness to be exploited, but a person under my banner. I am putting you in the light. Emily, it's the safest place for you to be. The dress was black, a whisper of silk that felt like water against her skin. It was simple, elegant, and more revealing than anything she had ever worn, with a low-cut back and a slit that ran up her thigh. The woman Antonio sent, a silent, older Italian woman named Sofia, piled her hair on top of her head, leaving soft tendrils to frame her face. She was a stranger, elegant and pale, reflected in the mirror. When she walked out, Luca was waiting by the elevator. He was in a perfectly tailored tuxedo. He turned when he heard her heels click on the marble. For the first time, she saw him stop. He didn't speak. He just looked, his eyes traveling from her hair, down her neck, to the way the dress clung to her hips, and then back to her eyes. The look was so raw, so intensely possessive. It was like a physical touch. You are, he finally said, his voice rough. Unforgettable. He held out his arm. She put her hand in the crook of his elbow, her skin tingling at the contact with the warm, crisp fabric. The gala was a sea of noise, light, and power. It was held in the grand ballroom of the city's oldest hotel, a place of crystal chandeliers and gold-leaf ceilings. The most powerful people in Marlowe City were there, politicians, judges, police chiefs, and the men who, like Luca, operated in the shadows. She saw the heads turn. She heard the whispers stop, then restart. She was the only one in the room who didn't belong, and she was on the arm of the most dangerous man there. She was terrified. Her knees shook, and she leaned into Luca's presence, grateful for the solid, unyielding strength of his arm. He guided her through the crowd, his hand moving from her elbow to the small of her back, a gesture that was both a support and a brand. That's Dominic Russo, he murmured in her ear, his breath warm. The old man, the one who gave the order. The man in the red vest is Judge Alastair. He's on our payroll. And that, he said, his voice tightening, is Dante Falcone. He was young, handsome in a slick, predatory way, and surrounded by laughing women. He was the rival Don's son, and he was looking right at her. I need a drink, Emily whispered, her mouth dry. Stay here, Luca said, his hand squeezing her back before he let go. Don't move. The moment he was gone, she felt exposed, a spotlight shining on her. She tried to look interested in the art on the wall, but her heart was hammering. You must be the angel who saved the devil. The voice was smooth, laced with an accent. Dante Falcone was standing beside her, a champagne flute in his hand. He was close, too close, invading her space. "I don't know what you mean," she said, trying to step back, but he mirrored her movement. "Of course you do. The whole city is talking about Luca Romano's new pet, the little waitress from the gutter." His eyes roamed her body, insolent and appraising. "He cleans you up nicely, but I have to wonder what he sees in you. Is it true what they say about diner girls?" He reached out, his fingers brushing a stray tendril of her hair. "Don't touch me." Her voice was a low hiss. "Or what?" He chuckled. "You'll call your master?" A shadow fell over them. "She doesn't have to." Luca was back. He hadn't raised his voice, but the sound cut through the ballroom's din like a razor. Dante Falcone's smile froze. He slowly turned, his hand dropping. Luca stood there, empty-handed, his eyes black and flat. He didn't look at Dante. He looked at Dante's hand, the one that had touched her. "Dante," Luca said, his voice dangerously soft, "it's good to see you. I was just telling Emily how your father enjoys fishing. Tell me, do you still have use of all your fingers?" The color drained from Dante's face. The charm vanished, replaced by a flicker of fear. No harm meant Romano, just welcoming the lovely lady to our world. "She is not in your world," Luca said. "And she is not lovely to you. She is nothing to you. You will not look at her. You will not speak to her. And if you ever—" He stepped closer, his voice dropping to a whisper only the three of them could hear. "Put your hand on her again. I will cut it from your arm and feed it to you. Am I clear?" Dante Falcone nodded, his throat working. He gave Emily one last hateful look and vanished into the crowd. Luca turned to her. The fury was still there, a banked fire in his eyes. He grabbed her arm, his grip too tight. "We're leaving!" He dragged her through the ballroom, past the staring, silent faces, out into the cold night air. The ride back to the penthouse was silent, a thick, vibrating tension filling the limousine. The second the elevator doors opened to the penthouse, she wrenched her arm from his grasp. "Don't you ever do that again," she seethed, whirling on him. He stopped, stunned by her fury. "Do what? Protect you?" "Protect me? That wasn't protection. That was a caveman display. You stood there and threatened to mutilate him. You paraded me around like a trophy, and the second someone else wanted to look at it, you threw a tantrum. He touched you," Luca growled, advancing on her. "And you own me?" she shot back, backing away until she hit the wall. "Is that it? Am I just another one of your cars? One of your buildings? Something you get to polish and keep in the garage? I am a person, Luca. You don't get to treat me like property." He slammed his hand against the wall next to her head, the sound echoing through the room. He was close, his body trapping hers, his chest heaving. The smell of whiskey and his cologne enveloped her. "Property?" he whispered, his voice a low, dangerous rumble. "You think I do this for my property? When he touched you, I wanted to kill him, not because he touched what was mine, but because he touched you." His other hand came up, his fingers trembling as they hovered just above her shoulder. He didn't touch her. He just vibrated with a restraint that was more terrifying than his anger. "I'm holding on to my control by a single thread. Emily," he breathed, his forehead leaning against the wall, his eyes closed. "I spend every minute of every day hunting the men who are trying to kill you. I lie awake in that chair outside your door, imagining 1,000 ways they could get to you. And then you walk out looking like that." His eyes opened, black and full of a raw, desperate hunger. "And I have to stand in a room full of monsters and pretend I don't want to throw you over my shoulder and lock you in my room for 1,000 years. The air between them was electric, all the anger and fear from the night culminating in this one. Breathless moment. Her body was pinned between the cold marble and his burning heat. He backed away, a sharp, ragged motion, as if touching her would burn him. He ran a hand through his hair, his composure shattering. "I will not take," he said, his voice hoarse, "anything you will not give freely. I am not the man who haunts this city. I am not him. I'm just afraid," she whispered, the admission torn from her. He froze, his back to her. "Afraid of him? Of Dante?" She shook her head, though he couldn't see. "No, not just of him, not just of this." She took a shaky breath. "I'm afraid of this. Of you. The gala, the threat, the raw violence simmering under the tuxedos. It had unearthed a memory she kept buried. She saw her brother, Michael. He was 20, all lanky limbs and a stupid, hopeful smile. He was standing on the corner of their street, tossing a baseball, a blue car, nondescript, rolling past. She was 16, sitting on the steps, and she'd yelled for him to get her a soda. He'd laughed and turned toward the bodega. The gunfire was flat, ugly, just like in the alley. Michael hadn't been the target. He'd just been in the way. A gang crossfire. The papers said, a territorial dispute, just like Luca and the Russos. She had survived. He had not. And ever since, she had been hiding, working double shifts, drowning her guilt in exhaustion, trying to be so small the world couldn't see her, until she'd run into an alley to save another man from the same fate. Emily, Luca said, his voice pulling her from the memory. He was watching her, his face etched with a concern she had never seen there. She didn't answer. She just walked past him, to her room, and locked the door. She didn't feel like a prisoner anymore. She felt like a fool, repeating the same patterns, drawn to the same fire that had burned her life to the ground. She found her purpose 3 days later. A commotion in the hall. A woman. One of the cleaning staff named Rosa was crying, her voice rising in panic. Emily opened her door. A young boy, no older than 6, was on the floor. He'd been running, slipped on the marble, and hit his head on the corner of a console table. There was blood. So much blood. The guard stood frozen, not knowing what to do. Rosa was hysterical. "Get out of the way," Emily said, her voice a sharp command that cut through the panic. The Silver Bell diner had taught her 2 things: how to handle a rush and how to handle accidents. "You, get me the large first aid kit from Mr. Romano's bathroom. You," she pointed to the other guard, "get me a bag of ice from the kitchen. Now." She knelt beside the boy, ignoring the blood. "Hey there," she said, her voice soft. "My name is Emily. What's yours?" "Leo," he sobbed, clutching his head. "Okay, Leo, you took a nasty fall. I'm just gonna look." "All right." She worked quickly, her hands steady. She cleaned the wound, her touch gentle. It was a bad cut, but not, she thought, a concussion. When the guard returned with the kit, she butterfly bandaged the gash with an efficiency that stunned them all. When she was done, she held the ice pack to his head, humming a tune she didn't know she remembered. Rosa was weeping with gratitude. Antonio, who had appeared at some point, watched from the hallway, his face unreadable. From that day, the penthouse changed. The staff, who'd been cold and invisible, now greeted her. Rosa brought her coffee. Even the guard's eyes softened. She was no longer just the boss's woman. She was Miss Emily, the one who had helped Leo. But as Emily felt herself settling, a part of this strange, violent family, Luca grew more distant. The hunt for the mole was consuming him. The betrayal ran deeper than he'd thought. He would stand at the window for hours, staring down at the city, the weight of his empire on his shoulders. Men surrounded him, but he was utterly alone, and he was afraid. She could see it. Not for himself. He was afraid for her, and in this world, that was the one fear a boss could not afford. The penthouse was abandoned. The day after the gala, Luca moved her. They didn't go to another glass tower. They drove for an hour, leaving Marlowe City behind until they reached a sprawling, high-walled estate that felt more like a fortress than a home. It was old brick, covered in ivy, with acres of manicured, empty gardens. This was the Romano compound, a place built by his grandfather, a sanctuary from the world he commanded. But it was still a cage. The tension from the gala, the raw, unspoken thing that had sparked between them, traveled with them. He was courteous, cold, and distant. He was consumed by the hunt for the mole, and the compound was put on lockdown. No one in, no one out. Emily found herself with nothing to do but walk the gardens, always with a guard, or read in the cavernous, wood-paneled library. She felt less like a prisoner and more like a ghost, haunting a life that was not hers. The attack came on a Tuesday night. It was not loud. Like the car bomb, it was quiet, which was worse. They were in the formal dining room, the two of them separated by 20 feet of polished mahogany. When Antonio entered, his face ashen. "They're inside," he whispered. Luca was moving before the words were finished. He didn't run. He flowed. He grabbed Emily's arm, pulling her from the chair, and shoved her toward a panel in the wall. "Alistair, stay with her," he commanded the guard at the door. "Lock it. Do not open it until I come for you." "Luca, no," she cried. But he was already gone, disappearing into the hall, a gun in his hand that seemed to have materialized from thin air. The steel door of the safe room clicked shut, plunging her into darkness with a man she didn't know. She heard shouting, muffled, then 2, 3, flat cracks, gunfire, inside the house. She waited for what felt like a lifetime, her heart a fist in her throat. Finally, the mechanism on the door whirred. It was Luca. His tuxedo was gone, replaced by a black shirt. His face was grim, but he was unharmed. "It's over," he said. "There were only 3 of them. They came through the service tunnels. They had help." He turned to the guard. "Find Antonio. Double the perimeter. I want the mole. I want him now." He started to lead her back to the dining room, but she pulled away, her ears catching a sound he had tuned out. A low groan. "Someone's hurt," she said, moving toward the kitchen. "Emily, stay with me." She ignored him, pushing through the kitchen doors. 2 men were on the floor. They were staff. One was a young guard she recognized, clutching his arm, his face pale. The other was the gardener, an older man named Sal, who had been shot in the leg. Blood was pooling on the terracotta tiles. The other guards were focused on the breach, on the threat. These men were an afterthought. "Get me the emergency kit," she commanded the nearest suit, her voice the same one she had used for Leo. "And towels, clean ones, now." She dropped to her knees beside Sal, her silk blouse brushing the floor. "Sal, it's Emily. You're going to be okay. We're going to stop the bleeding." She worked, her hands sure and steady. The sight of the blood, the fear, it didn't paralyze her. It focused her. She pressed towels to the wound, elevated his leg, and spoke in a low, calm monotone, keeping the old man from going into shock. She moved to the guard, her hands already stained, and began working on a tourniquet for his arm. Luca just stood in the doorway, watching. He saw her, kneeling in a pool of his man's blood, her face a mask of pure, competent focus. She was not a liability. She was not a weakness. She was strong, stronger than any of them. When the medics, his private on-call team, finally arrived and took the men, she stood up, her hands and the front of her expensive clothes dark with blood. She looked at him, her adrenaline fading, leaving her shaking. He walked to her, slowly. He didn't speak. He just reached out and brushed a stray piece of hair from her face, his thumb smudging the blood on her cheek. Later that night, she found him in his study. He was standing in the dark, a glass of whiskey in his hand, staring out the window at the rain that had begun to fall. "He'll live," she said, standing in the doorway. "Sal, the medic said you got him to me in time." "I didn't," he said, his back to her. "You did." He turned, his face a shadow. "You should have stayed in the safe room. You should have known I wouldn't." He walked toward her, setting the glass down. He stopped a few feet away, his eyes searching hers, trying to understand the woman who had tackled him in an alley and just saved his gardener's life. "I have spent the last 10 years building walls," he said, his voice low, raw, brick and steel, men and guns, and inside, I kept myself empty. It's safe when you're empty. There's nothing to lose, nothing to break. He took a step closer. "Then you. You just walked in. You didn't ask. You didn't care about the walls. Luca, you scare me." "Emily," he whispered, the admission torn from him. "You scare me more than the bullets do, because I am not empty anymore, and I don't know how to fight this." He was confessing, not as a boss, but as a man. He hadn't let himself care for anyone, not in years, not since his world had demanded he become iron, and she, with her stubborn kindness, had undone him. The storm broke then, the rain lashing against the windows, the wind howling. The house was quiet, locked down, safe, but the air between them was the most dangerous thing in the world. She couldn't sleep. The attack, his words, The vibrating tension was too much. At 2 in the morning, she left her room, padding barefoot through the dark. Silent halls, she went to the rooftop garden, a glass-enclosed atrium at the top of the house, a place she had discovered on her walks. She stood at the glass, watching the lightning split the sky over Marlowe City. The storm was violent, beautiful. "You shouldn't be up here." His voice was right behind her. She turned. He was there, barefoot like her, wearing only a pair of black sweatpants, his chest bare. His scars, the road map of his life, were pale in the dim light. "Neither should you," she whispered. He walked to stand beside her, not touching, just watching the storm. "I'm afraid," she said, finishing her thought from that night at the penthouse. "But not of your world. Luca, not anymore." "What then?" She turned to face him. "I'm afraid of this, that I'm starting to feel safe here. All of this is starting to feel like home." His eyes met hers, the dark, turbulent intensity in them matching the storm outside. "What if it is?" he asked. He lifted his hand, his calloused fingers tracing the line of her jaw, his touch so gentle it was an ache. "What if you were not meant for that old life? What if you were meant for this?" He leaned in, his forehead brushing hers. "What if you were meant for me?" He kissed her. It was not the hesitant, hungry kiss from the night of the explosion. This was slow. It was breathless. It was a conscious, deliberate surrender. The world outside the glass dissolved, leaving only the sound of the rain and the hammering of her heart. Her hands found their way up his chest, her fingers tracing the hard lines of his muscles, then tangling in his hair, pulling him closer. His mouth was firm, warm, tasting of whiskey in the storm. He deepened the kiss, a low groan rumbling in his chest. His hands slid from her face, down her shoulders, to her waist, pulling her flush against him. She was in a thin cotton nightgown, and his skin was hot against the fabric. He broke the kiss, but only to trail his mouth down her throat, his breath hot against her skin. "Emily," he rascalped, his voice a prayer against her collarbone. He traced the faint, silvery line of a scar just above her collarbone, a relic from a childhood fall. His lips brushed it, a gesture of such profound intimacy it made her legs weak. "You are covered in my blood," he murmured, his hands sliding up her back. "And I have never seen anything more beautiful." He lifted her then, as if she weighed nothing, and carried her from the center of the atrium to a sheltered alcove, a daybed hidden among the plants. He laid her down, the sound of the rain a wild drumbeat around them. He looked at her, his eyes dark with a reverence she had never seen. This was not a boss taking what he wanted. This was a man, terrified and in awe, asking for something he didn't know how to request. And she gave it to him. It was slow, and it was intense. It was a discovery, a mapping of scars, his and hers. His hands, which held so much violence, were impossibly gentle. His touch a tremble of restraint. Her fear dissolved, replaced by a deep, aching need to be closer, to erase the last remaining space between them. It was not a conversation. It was a finding. In the heart of the storm, two broken, guarded people found a moment of stillness, a breathless, shuddering peace that neither had ever known. The next morning, the storm had passed. The compound was quiet, the sky a bruised, exhausted gray. Emily woke up tangled in his sheets, in his arms. He was awake, watching her, his face clear of the shadows, the armor gone. The peace lasted for 1 hour. Then Nico arrived. He didn't knock. He barged into Luca's bedroom, his face a mask of thunder, and stopped dead. He saw Emily, her bare shoulder visible above the white sheet. He saw Luca, sitting up, his gun in holster on the nightstand. Nico's eyes, cold and assessing, snapped to Luca. "Are you insane?" Luca was on his feet in an instant, pulling on his pants, his face darkening with a lethal calm. "Get out! Get out!" Nico laughed, a short, bitter sound. "The compound is breached. We have a mole we can't find, and you're distracted." He spat the word, his gaze flicking to Emily with pure contempt. I told you a civilian girl was a mistake. She's made you soft. She's the weakness." "She," Luca said, his voice dropping to that deadly quiet. is the only reason Sal is alive. She's not the weakness. Nico, the weakness is in my men. The weakness is the traitor who let the Russos in. And how do you know it's not her? Nico challenged, taking a step closer. How do you know she isn't the mole? Luca hit him. It was not a fight. It was a judgment. A single, brutal backhand that snapped Nico's head to the side. She stays, Luca said his voice shaking with contained rage. She is not to be questioned. She is not to be touched. You question that again. You look at her again and you are out. Understood? Nico held his jaw, his eyes burning with a hatred that included both of them. He nodded once and left the room, slamming the door. Emily was sitting up, pulling the sheet around her. She was terrified, but not of Nico. She was terrified of the choice Luca had just made. He had put her before his most trusted man. He's right, she whispered. Luca, maybe I should go. It would be safer. No. He came and sat on the bed, his back to her. He looked defeated. It's too late for that. Refusing to send you away is the only choice I have left. I won't let them have you. He left to handle the lockdown, leaving her alone in the vast, quiet bedroom, the scent of him on the sheets. She felt, for the first time, like she truly belonged, that this was her life now. She dressed, not in the clothes from her old life, but in the new ones. She wandered the house, finally feeling like she wasn't an intruder. She found herself in his study, the room where he'd confessed his fear. She ran her hand along the spines of his books. She was restless, the confrontation with Nico leaving a sour taste. She sat at his desk, a massive piece of oak. She idly pulled at a drawer. It was unlocked. Inside, among old photos and cigar cutters, was a worn leather ledger, his father's. She smiled, a small, sad smile, wondering if Luca had been a boy in this room, watching his father work. She opened it. It was a record. Payments, names, dates. Most of it meant nothing, but then a section. Territorial acquisitions. Her eyes scanned the familiar names. Marlow Heights, her neighborhood. She saw a date, 10 years ago. The week Michael died, her heart stopped. It was not a feeling. It was a physical event. The blood stopped moving in her veins. It was a log of payments. Cleanup of O'Malley Associates, and beside it, a folded, yellowed piece of paper, not a police report. A handwritten note from Luca's consigliere at the time to his father. The O'Malley problem in Marlow Heights is handled. Their new heroin distribution line is cut. Total cost, $20,000. There was one civilian casualty during the operation, a boy. Michael Carter. Unfortunate, but necessary to secure the territory. The police have ruled it a gang crossfire. Unfortunate, but necessary. The world tilted. The air left her lungs. It wasn't a random crossfire. It wasn't a stray bullet. It was an operation. It was their operation, the Romano family. She was still sitting there, the paper clutched in her hand. When Luca walked in, he was smiling, the first genuine, unguarded smile she had ever seen on his face. Antonio found him. The mole. It was Marco. The bastard. He stopped. He saw her face. He saw the paper in her hand. His smile vanished. He knew, instantly, what she had found. Emily, he said, his voice hollow. She stood up, her body moving on its own. She didn't cry. She was too far gone for tears. She was in a cold, dead place. You said, she whispered, her voice unrecognizable. You said you were protecting me from the men who killed in alleys. Emily, I didn't. Unfortunate, but necessary. She read. My brother, my 16-year-old brother. He was necessary. That was my father, he said, his voice desperate. I was a boy. I was at school. I didn't know. Emily, I swear to you, I did not know. He was stunned. He was horrified. His father's sin had just risen from the grave and destroyed the only good thing in his life, and he was telling the truth. She saw it in his eyes. He didn't know, but it didn't matter. It doesn't matter, she said, the paper fluttering from her hand to the floor. You didn't pull the trigger, but you are him. You are his son. You are this house. You are this poison. She walked past him. Emily, wait, please. He reached for her, but didn't touch her. She stopped at the door, her back to him. "You said you wouldn't take anything I wouldn't give freely." He was silent. The blood had drained from his face. "I'm afraid," she whispered, her voice finally breaking, a single, hot tear rolling down her cheek. "I was afraid of being your property, but this is so much worse. I've become the one thing I swore I would never be. I'm the woman who loves the man who killed her family." She turned. "If I walk out that door, will you stop me?" He looked at her, his heart, his world, his entire life breaking in that one silent moment. He had all the guns, all the men, all the power in the city, and he had never been so helpless. He shook his head, a single agonizing motion. She didn't run. She walked. She walked out of the study, down the grand staircase, past the guards who looked at her, confused, but did not move. She walked past Antonio, who stood in the hall, his face a mask of profound, old-world grief. He knew. He had always known. She walked out the front door of the fortress, into the gray, afternoon light. She left the compound, the high walls, the man she loved, and the unbearable truth of what he was. She was crying now, confused, heartbroken, and completely, utterly alone. She took a cab back to Marlow Heights, the $40 fare, paid from the emergency cash Antonio had pressed into her hand at the gate, felt like the last piece of a life she was trying to buy back. The neighborhood looked the same, but she was different. The cracks in the sidewalk seemed wider, the graffiti on the brickwork more menacing, the smell of damp pavement and overflowing dumpsters, once just the background scent of her life, now felt like a threat. Her apartment was cold, the air thick with the smell of dust and stale hope. Her mail was a 3-inch thick pile of junk and bills on the floor. Her work uniform was still in a heap by the door. She picked it up, the cheap polyester smelling of grease in the alley, and threw it in the trash. She had walked away. She had chosen. But the silence of the tiny apartment was louder than the gunfire at the compound. Luca's absence was a physical ache, a hollowed-out space in her chest. She had loved him. She still loved him. And his family, his legacy, had murdered her brother. The two facts existed together, a paradox that left her breathless, waking up in the cold, gray light of her old room, her hand reaching for a man who wasn't there. She tried to find work. She went to other diners, cafes, and bars, but the neighborhood had changed in the weeks she had been gone. It was harder, the edges sharper. The Russo family, emboldened by their war with Romano, were pushing in. The men on the corners had new faces, their eyes colder, and she was being watched. At first, she thought it was paranoia, a side effect of living with guards, but it was real. A dark gray sedan, not one of Luca's, was always parked a block away. It was never there in the morning, but it was there when she came home. Sometimes a man would be walking behind her, his footsteps too steady, too rhythmic. She thought it was Luca, a part of her, the part that ached for him, hoped it was. She imagined him, tormented, sending men to keep her safe from a distance. But the feeling was different. This was not protective. It was observant. In the compound, Luca was spiraling. He was a machine carved from ice. He had not slept in his bed since she left. He lived in his study, fueled by coffee and a cold, quiet rage that terrified his men more than his anger ever had. He had dealt with Marco, the mole from the garage, with a swiftness that was legendary. There was no trial, no appeal, just a car, returned to the Russo family, with Marco in the trunk. The message was clear. The war was total. "You must bring her back," Antonio said, standing in the study, his face etched with worry. "This is not you. Luca, this is your father." "She made her choice," Luca said, not looking up from a map of the city's docks. "She is a civilian. She is out. She is out, and she is a target," Antonio pressed. "The Russos know who she is. They know what she was to you. They will not leave her alone." "She is not my concern," Luca bit out, his voice so cold it made the old consigliere flinch. "Then you are a fool," Antonio said, his own voice rising. "You are letting your pride kill the only person who has ever seen you as a man and not a monster. You are letting your father win." Luca swept his arm across the desk. Maps, glasses, and decanters crashed to the floor. "Get out!" Antonio looked at the wreckage, at the man he had helped raise, and saw the ghost of the old Don staring back at him. He nodded, his heart heavy. "As you wish. Capo." He left Luca alone, in the dark, with the ghosts he had chosen over the living. Emily had been turned down for a third job. It was dark and a cold. Wet wind was blowing off the river, promising a miserable night. She pulled her thin coat tighter. She had almost no money left. She cut through the alley behind the Silver Bell Diner, her shortcut, the place where it had all begun. It was a mistake. Halfway through, 2 men stepped out from the shadow of the dumpster. They were not the neighborhood junkies. They were broad, wearing dark jackets, their faces hard. "Emily Carter," one said. It wasn't a question. "Mister, Russo has been looking for you. He wants to send a message to your old boyfriend." Emily's blood ran cold. She didn't scream. She just backed away, slowly. "I'm not with him anymore." "He doesn't know that." The man chuckled. Lunging, he grabbed her arm, his fingers digging in like a vice. She fought, kicking and scratching, the adrenaline surging, but he was too strong. He backhanded her, the force of it sending her crashing against the brick wall. Her head hit the brick, and the world exploded in white-hot pain. He dragged her up. "Now you're a good girl, and we just broke an arm. He'll get A black sedan, not the gray one she had been seeing, screeched to a halt at the mouth of the alley, its high beams flooding the narrow space. The men holding her froze, blinded. 2 doors opened. 2 men, older, wearing long, dark coats, stepped out. They were not Luca's usual team. They were Antonio's men, the old guard, men who had been loyal to the family long before Luca was born. "Let the girl go," the first man said. His voice was calm, almost fatherly. The Russo man laughed. "Or what? Old man, you and your—" The old man moved faster than Emily could believe. There was no sound, just a fluid motion. The Russo man holding her grunted, a wet, surprised sound, and collapsed. The second Russo man pulled a gun, but he was too slow. Antonio's man was already on him, a short, brutal fight that ended with a final, sickening crack. It was over in 5 seconds. Emily was on the ground, her arms screaming in pain, her head spinning. The first man, the one who had spoken, knelt beside her, his face kind. "Mister, Antonio sends his deepest apologies. Miss Carter," he said, gently probing her arm. "He did not think they would move so fast. You are hurt. We must take you back." "No," she wept, the tears of pain and terror finally coming. "No, I can't go back. Please." "He is not there," the man said gently. "He is at a war council, mister. Antonio said to bring you to the medical wing. You are not safe here. You have never been safe." She was too weak, too hurt, too tired to fight. She let him help her into the back of the car, the soft leather a horrible, familiar comfort. She woke to the rhythmic beep of a heart monitor. The room was not her apartment. It was dark, clean, and smelled of antiseptic, a private room, a hospital. Her arm was in a sling, her head throbbed, and a light, warm blanket was tucked around her. She turned her head. He was there. Luca was asleep in the chair beside her bed. He was not the capo. He was a wreck. He was in the same suit he'd been wearing in the study, now hopelessly wrinkled. His dark hair was a mess, his jaw covered in a 3-day-old stubble. His face, in sleep, was stripped of all its armor. He looked young, exhausted, and broken. His hand was wrapped around hers, his grip tight even as he slept. She just watched him for a long time. The beep of the monitor, the only sound. She saw the dark circles under his eyes. She saw the faint tremor in his hand. This was not the man who had let her go. This was the man who had been destroyed by it. She shifted, her hand tightening in his. His eyes snapped open. Not slowly, but all at once. The way a predator wakes. He was disoriented for a fraction of a second, and then he saw her. He saw she was awake. He didn't speak. He just stared. His eyes, red-rimmed and raw, tracing her face, her bandaged head, the sling on her arm. He looked at their joined hands, and a shuddering breath escaped him. "Antonio," he rasped, his voice rough from disuse. "He told me. He had you watched. He defied my order. He saved my life, she whispered. I told them to let you go, he said, his voice breaking, his control shattering. I told them you were a civilian. I almost got you killed. Again. But I'm not, she said, her voice finding a strange, new strength. I'm not a civilian, am I? I haven't been since I pulled you from that alley. He started to speak, to apologize, to talk about his father, but she lifted her good hand, the one he was holding, and pressed a finger to his lips. Stop, she said. He froze, his eyes locked on hers. I forgive you. He looked, for the first time since she had met him, completely and utterly stunned. Not for you, she said, her voice quiet but firm, and not for him. I forgive you because I love you, and I can't live in that apartment anymore. I can't live a half-life, haunted by ghosts. I chose this. He just stared, unable to process the words. She reached up, her fingers tracing the rough stubble on his jaw. You didn't kill my brother. Luca, your father did. His men did. A system did. Her eyes held his, her gaze unwavering. But you can choose, right now, not to become the kind of man who did. You can choose to be better. You can choose to end this. But you can't do it alone. He leaned into her touch, a broken, desperate man, and pressed his forehead against hers, just as he had done after the explosion. But this time, it was not anger and possession. It was surrender. He was silent, but his shoulders shook. They were a team. The following days were a blur of cold, hard planning. Emily sat at his side, her arm in a sling, her presence a silent, powerful statement to his men. The air was no longer hostile. It was electric. She was not Capo's weakness. She was his strength. Nico, sit, Luca commanded, his voice the steel authority she remembered, but the deadness was gone. It was replaced by a sharp, focused fire. Nico, who had been avoiding her, sat. His face was sullen. We are ending this, Luca said, his hands flat on the study's desk. I am offering Dominic Russo a truce, a peace meeting. Antonio and Nico both looked up, shocked. Boss, you can't be serious, Nico said. It's a trap. They'll never honor it. I know, Luca said, his eyes flicking to the map on the wall. They'll see it as weakness, as an opportunity. They will accept, and they will plan an ambush, but they don't know who the trap is really for. The meeting was set for a neutral warehouse at the docks. 2 nights later, Luca was going with a skeleton crew, his most trusted men. Emily insisted on being there. No, Luca said, his voice final. You are not a target, not again. I am not a target, she agreed, stepping into his space. I am your partner. I will not be in the building. I will be in the command car with Antonio. I am not asking. Luca, I am telling you. He looked at her, at the woman who had been a trembling waitress, and saw a queen. He nodded. The warehouse was a vast, cavernous tomb, smelling of salt and diesel. Rain hammered on the tin roof. Luca, flanked by 6 men, walked to the center. Dante Russo and 10 of his men walked in from the other side. Emily watched from the command car, a black armored SUV parked 200 yards away, its tinted windows looking over the scene. Antonio sat beside her, his face a grim mask. This feels wrong. Capo. She heard Nico's voice over the comms. He was with Luca's team. My gut is screaming. Hold your position, Luca's voice replied. Calm. Dante Russo smiled, his arms open. Luca, I'm so glad you have seen the reason. This war is bad for business. It is, Luca agreed, stopping 20 feet away. And I have brought you a gift, Dante said. A peace offering to show my good faith. He snapped his fingers, and from the rafters, gunfire erupted. Ambush! Luca's men roared, diving for cover. But the gunfire wasn't just coming from the rafters, it was coming from their side. Emily watched in horror as Nico, Luca's most trusted lieutenant, turned his gun, not on the Russos, but on his own men, shooting Luca's personal guard in the back. Nico! Luca's voice was a roar of betrayal over the comms, lost in the sound of a full-scale firefight. It was you, Antonio whispered, his face white. It was always you. Nico had allied with the Russos, planning to take out Luca and his loyalists, leaving the empire for himself. Luca was pinned, taking cover behind a stack of crates. He was good, but he was outnumbered, betrayed. A Russo sniper in the rafters was zeroing in. Emily saw it before anyone else, the red dot wavering, then settling on Luca's chest as he moved to reload. She grabbed the radio from Antonio. "Sniper, rafters, east side, all units, light him up." Her voice, clear and cold, cut through the panic, but it was too late. Luca saw Nico moving in, his gun raised. He pushed off the crate to fire at his traitor, exposing himself. The sniper's shot rang out, a heavy crack that was different from the others. Emily saw Luca jerk, a spray of blood erupting from his shoulder. He went down. "No!" she screamed. The old Emily would have hidden, wept. Emily moved. She threw open the door of the SUV. "Antonio, get the car to the south entrance. Now!" She ignored his shout. Grabbing a medical kit from the back, she ran, low to the ground, zigzagging between shipping containers, the sound of bullets pinging off the metal around her. She reached the warehouse door, her fear gone, replaced by a cold, burning rage. His men were laying down covering fire, but they were trapped. She slid across the concrete, a dozen feet, to where Luca lay. He was conscious, his hand pressed to his shoulder, blood pumping between his fingers. "Emily," he groaned, his face pale with shock and pain. "You have to run. Get out." "Shut up, Luca," she snapped, her hands already working, tearing open the field dressing. Her hands, which had trembled in the alley, were perfectly steady. They were covered in his blood. Again. "You are not dying here," she hissed, pressing the dressing to the wound with all her strength. He roared in pain. "I'm not leaving you," she said, her eyes locked on his, a fierce, unbreakable promise. "I choose this. I choose you." She looked up at his remaining two men, their faces bloody and grim. "Get him up. We are getting out, now." She knelt beside him, her small body a shield against the chaos, her hand on his chest, as his men grabbed him, dragging him toward the south entrance, toward the sound of Antonio's car, toward the life she had just chosen. The black SUV tore through the streets of Marlow City, a silent, armored bullet in the back. Emily held her hand against Luca's shoulder, the silk of his jacket soaked and slippery with his blood. His head was in her lap, his face a pale, ashen gray. "Just stay with me, Luca," she whispered, her voice a fierce, trembling command. "You are not leaving me. Do you hear me? You are not allowed to die." Antonio drove, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. Nah, his face a mask of stone. He ran 3 red lights, the powerful engine the only sound. They didn't go to a hospital. They went to a private, unmarked clinic in the basement of a luxury high-rise, a place built and funded by the Romano family for this exact purpose. A trauma surgeon, a quiet man named Doctor. Vescovi was waiting. They wheeled him away. The heavy doors swung shut, leaving Emily in the sterile, white hallway. She stood there for an hour, then 2. She was still covered in his blood. Her arm throbbed in its sling, a forgotten ache. She did not sit. She did not cry. She just stared at the doors. Antonio finally touched her arm. "Miss Emily, he is strong. He will fight. You should let the doctor see to your arm." "Not until I know," she said, her voice flat. It was almost dawn when Dr. Vescovi came out, peeling off his surgical gloves. "He is alive," the doctor said, his voice heavy with exhaustion. "Barely." The sniper's bullet was high velocity. It shattered his clavicle and tore through the brachial artery. He lost a great deal of blood. He is stable, for now. But the next 48 hours will be critical. The risk of infection is very high. Emily finally let out the breath she had been holding since she saw him fall. Her knees buckled. Antonio caught her. Luca did not wake for 3 days. Emily never left the clinic. She slept in the chair beside his bed, her own arm now in a new, clean sling. She watched his chest rise and fall, the machines beeping a steady, fragile rhythm. On the 4th day, his fever spiked. The infection doctor Vescovi had feared was here, and the Romano Empire, without its boss, was blind and vulnerable. Antonio came to her, his face gray with strain. "Miss Emily, the Russos are scattered, but the Falcones are moving. They smell blood in the water. Dante Falcone has seized 2 of our shipping containers at the docks." Emily looked from Antonio's worried face to Luca's, pale and damp with sweat. "No one," she said, her voice quiet, but hard as steel. "No one touches what is his." She went to his bedside. She took his hand. It was hot, his skin dry. "Luca," she whispered, "I need you, but you need to fight. So you are going to rest, and I am going to handle this. I am not asking. I am telling you." She kissed his forehead. Then she stood up and turned to Antonio. "Take me to the study." For the next 2 weeks, Emily Carter ruled the Romano family. She sat at Luca's massive oak desk, her arm in its sling, her face pale but her eyes burning. At first, the men, the capos and lieutenants, looked at her with disbelief. This waitress, this girl, giving orders. But Antonio stood at her shoulder. "Mr. Romano is incapacitated. His orders, given to me before the warehouse, were clear. Miss Carter speaks with his voice. You will obey." And she did not speak like a girl. She spoke like a leader. She was quick, decisive. She didn't know the streets, but she knew people. "Dante Falcone took our containers," she said to the room of 8 stone-faced men. "Good, let him have them. They're full of cheap electronics. But he left his own warehouse unguarded to do it. I want our men to seize his warehouse, the one with the imported pharmaceuticals, and send him a bill for the storage fee." "We are not barbarians," the men stared. Then, one by one, they smiled. But the true threat was not Dante. It was his mother, Isabella Falcone, the matriarch, the one who held the real power. She requested a meeting. "It is a trap, Miss Emily," Antonio warned. "She is a spider. She will unnerve you, and then she will strike." "Set the meeting," Emily said. "Neutral ground, a place of my choosing. Not hers. The old cathedral. Noon. No guards inside." The St. Ignatius Cathedral was vast, cold, and smelled of incense and old stone. Emily waited in the front pew. Isabella Falcone entered, a woman in her late 60s, dressed in immaculate, expensive black. Her white hair was pulled back in a severe bun. She was the mirror image of Antonio, a relic of the old world. "So," Isabella said, her voice echoing in the empty church, "you are the whore who brought the Romano Empire to its knees." Emily did not turn. She continued to look at the stained glass window. "I am the woman who is holding it together. You are here, Mrs. Falcone, because you are smarter than your son. You know the Russos are finished. You know this war is costing you millions. And you know that if Luca Romano dies, this city will descend into a chaos that will burn your family's holdings to the ground." Isabella's sharp intake of breath was the only sound. She sat in the pew behind Emily. "You have audacity, girl." "I have leverage," Emily corrected. Finally turning, her eyes were clear, steady. "You want peace. I want stability. You want the docks, but you need our transport lines to make them profitable. Dante thinks in bullets. I think in ledgers. Let's make a deal." For an hour, they spoke. It was not a negotiation. It was a realignment of power. Emily didn't threaten. She reasoned. She offered new shipping routes, a joint venture in the new port, a shared peace that would make both families richer than war ever could. Isabella Falcone stared at her shrewd eyes missing nothing. "You are not like them. You are not like him." "No," Emily said, standing. "I'm not, but I am all he has, and I will not let him fall. Do we have a deal, Mrs. Falcone?" Isabella stood. "You are a formidable woman. Emily Carter, Luca Romano is a fool for getting shot, but he is a genius for finding you. You will have your deal." When Emily returned to the clinic, Luca was awake. His fever had broken. He was weak, his eyes shadowed, but he was him. "You're back," he rasped. She sat on the bed, her good hand finding his. "I had errands to run." Antonio told him everything later, how she had faced down his men, how she had gone toe-to-toe with Isabella Falcone and won. Luca just watched her as she slept in the chair, his heart aching with a feeling so profound, so full of awe. He had no name for it. The war was not over. There was one loose thread: Nico. He was captured a week later, found hiding in a cellar in the Irish territory. starving and desperate. They brought him to the study at the compound. Luca was there, out of the clinic, his arm in a heavy sling, his face pale but his eyes were iron. Emily stood by the fireplace, watching. Nico was thrown to the floor. He was bloody, defiant, his eyes full of a sour, venomous hate. "Why?" Luca asked, his voice quiet. "Why?" Nico laughed, a wet, bloody sound. "Because you are a fool. You let her," he spat, gesturing at Emily. "Poison you. You put a civilian, a waitress, before your family, before me. I served your father. I served you, and you threw me away for her. She is more family than you ever were," Luca said, his voice cold. He looked at Emily. She was the one who had been betrayed. She was the one Nico's actions had almost killed. "He is yours, Emily," Luca said. The room was silent. Antonio and the guards waited. "He betrayed us. He tried to kill you. By every law we have, his life is forfeit. Say the word." Nico stared at her, a sneer on his face, expecting her to cry or demand his death. Emily walked toward him, her footsteps silent on the rug. She knelt, just as she had knelt beside the wounded boy, Leo. She looked into Nico's eyes. She saw his rage, his jealousy, but mostly, she saw his weakness. He was a man consumed by a pride he had not earned. "You're wrong," she said, her voice soft. "He didn't get weak. He got strong enough to care about something other than this room, these rules." She stood and turned to Luca. "Let him go." The silence in the room was absolute. Antonio's jaw dropped. "Emily," Luca said, confused. "I mean it," she said, her gaze steady. "Take his name, take his money, banish him from this city forever. Let him live. Let him live with the fact that he betrayed everything. And in the end, he was shown mercy by a waitress." She walked to Luca's side. "Killing him just makes us like them. It makes us the men who killed my brother. And you are better than that. We are better than that." Luca stared at her. His heart cracked open. She had not just saved his life, she had saved his soul. He nodded to his guards. "You heard her. Get him out of my sight. If he ever sets foot in Marlow City again, he is dead. But his life, for now, is spared." Nico was dragged away, not angry anymore, but broken, shocked into a silence more complete than any bullet could have delivered. The war was over. The Russos were destroyed. The Falcones were partners. The Romano Empire was, impossibly, stronger and more stable than ever. Weeks passed. The city healed. Luca's arm healed, leaving another scar, another story. He was different. The cold, ruthless edge was still there, but it was tempered. He was disciplined, focused. He was a boss, but he was also a man. He began, with Emily's guidance, to change things. The Michael Carter Foundation was formed, a legitimate charity that began pouring money into the rundown neighborhoods, starting with a new community center in Marlow Heights, right across from the Silver Bell Diner. He was still a king, but he was learning to be a guardian. One night, a month after the truce, he found her in the rooftop garden at the compound. The glass atrium was quiet, the city a glittering tapestry of lights far below. He was quiet, his hands in his pockets. "It's peaceful here," she said, leaning against the glass. "My mother loved this room," he said, his voice soft. "She hated life. She hated what it made my father, what it was making me." He pulled something from his pocket. It was not a velvet box. It was a single, heavy, ornate iron key. He held it out to her. This was hers, an estate, on the coast, 3 hours from here, all gardens and ocean. She left it to me, hoping I would one day have the sense to run. He stepped closer, placing the key in her palm, his hand closing over hers. "I am not a good man. Emily, I am stained. I am what I am. But I want to be better. I want to be the man you see." He looked into her eyes, his own vulnerable, stripped of all pretense. "Build whatever life you want there. A garden, a library, a home. Build it with or without me. I don't care. I'll follow. I'll be whatever you want. A husband, a guardian. Just be..." Tears streamed down her face. She closed her hand around the key. "I accept," she whispered, "but on my terms." He stilled. "Anything." "We don't run," she said, her voice firm. We stay. We finish what we started here. We make this city stable, safe, so that no more boys like Michael die in alleys for nothing. We make this name mean something more than blood. And then we leave. Together." He pulled her to him, his arms wrapping around her waist, his face burying in her hair. "Together," he vowed, his voice thick. Their love was now public. She was not the boss's woman. She was Emily Carter. She stood beside him, not behind him. She was no longer the helpless waitress. She was the one who had negotiated the peace, the one who had shown mercy. She was the queen. Months later, on a warm summer night, he led her back to the rooftop garden. An old phonograph, his mother's, was playing a slow, scratchy song. She was barefoot, wearing a simple, soft dress. He was in a linen shirt, his scars hidden, his sling long gone. He held out his hand. She took it. They slowly danced, moving in a comfortable, easy silence. The city lights gleaming far below. He was not the capo. She was not the waitress. They were just Luca and Emily. He stopped dancing, but he didn't let her go. He held her waist, his forehead resting on hers. "It's quiet," she whispered. "Yes," he said. He pulled back, his eyes tracing her features as if seeing her for the first time. "That night in the alley, I was bleeding out. I was ready for it. I was so tired of fighting, of this life. And then you, this angry, terrified, stubborn angel, tackled me behind a dumpster." A small, genuine smile touched his lips. "You didn't just save me from gunfire, Emily," he murmured, his voice thick. "You saved me from myself." He kissed her. A slow, deep promise, full of a future that was not about blood, but about life. It was not an end, but a beginning, high above the city that they would one day leave together. Thank you so much for listening to our story. She saved a stranger from gunfire. We hope you enjoyed it. We would love to hear from you. So please drop a comment and let us know where in the world you are listening from. If you love this story, please be sure to subscribe to Mafia Romance Stories for more tales of danger, passion, and redemption. And don't forget to share your thoughts in English on what you thought of Luca and Emily's journey.